If you think submitting a private DBQ means you won't have a C&P exam, that assumption could really cost you. More veterans are submitting private disability benefits questionnaires, DBQs, and still getting scheduled for a compensation and pension C&P exam, and they're confused. So today I'm going to explain exactly why that happens, how the VA weighs a private DBQ against a C&P exam DBQ, and what you should do before you submit anything. Because a DBQ can strengthen your claim, but it does not replace the process. Let's start simple. A DBQ doesn't decide your rating. It documents the medical findings that allow a rater to apply the VA's rating criteria. It is not your claim. It is medical evidence. It defines severity, and in some cases, it can provide a diagnosis as well. But we'll talk about a little bit later in the video. Every C&P exam results in a completed DBQ. The examiner fills it out. That form is what the rater uses to match your symptoms to the rating schedule. Private doctors can also fill out DBQs. That's allowed. But submitting one does not eliminate the VA's authority to schedule a C&P exam. Here's the line I want you to remember. The DBQ records the medical findings. The rater determines the severity. Let me repeat that because it's really, really important. The DBQ records the medical findings. The rater determines the severity. Now, let's walk through what that looks like real quick here. Excuse me. All right. When you open a DBQ, the first section is the diagnosis. This sounds, really basic, but it's critical. The correct diagnosis must be listed. The correct condition, correct date, often the ICD code. If the diagnosis is wrong here, it can create serious downstream problems. If your private DBQ says one thing, and your VA exam says something completely or slightly different, the VA is going to resolve that discrepancy. And that can affect your rating for the better or for the worse. So the next thing we have after diagnosis is we have medical history. This section includes onset, progression, and treatment. This is where consistency matters. If your private DBQ says your condition started in 2005, but your records show treatment beginning in 2015, that gap will be noticed and likely considered. If your DBQ describes severe symptoms, but your treatment notes show mild complaints, that inconsistency becomes credibility risk. Then we get into the engine of the DBQ, the symptoms and the severity markers. This is where checkboxes matter. Frequency, duration, measured limitations, specific thresholds. The VA does not guess. The rater matches those boxes directly to the Code of Federal Regulations rating criteria, the 38 CFR that we always talk about. If a box isn't checked, reaching a higher rating becomes much harder, unless the narrative or other evidence clearly supports it. Now, here's where it gets important. If you submit a private DBQ and the VA still orders a C&P exam, that examiner is filling out the same exact structure. And the rater will compare the two. If they align, awesome, you did great. If they conflict, the VA rater must weigh the credibility and the rationale. So the next piece that we look at is functional impact, right? There's often underestimated functional impacts here. And these impacts address how your condition affects your ability to work, concentrate, lift, stand, socialize, function overall. This is where proper rating assignment, it really begins to form. This is where TDIU discussions sometimes start. Again, consistency matters, right? And then we get into doctor's remarks, examiner remarks. In 2026, narrative justification matters more than checkbox volume. Remember that. A short, medically reasoned explanation is far more powerful than 10 boxes without context. Based on all I've heard, raters are increasingly looking for internal logic. They're looking for reasoning. They're looking for consistency across records. Now, let's address the big question. Why does the VA still order C&P exams after a private DBQ? Well, because the VA has a duty to assist. Because they're allowed to clarify conflicting evidence. Because they're responsible for resolving discrepancies. And because in some cases, private DBQs lack detailed rationale. A private DBQ does not eliminate the VA's right to order a C&P exam. And I'll go a step further. Based on current trends, veterans should be prepared for the possibility of more follow-up C&P exams, not fewer. That does not mean that private DBQs are useless. It means they must be done correctly. So what's changing really? Raters are evaluating provider credentials much more closely. They're assessing whether objective findings support the severity of the claims. They're comparing DBQs against treatment notes. They're looking for internal consistency. Strong private DBQs include a clear diagnosis with an ICD code, medical reasoning, objective findings when applicable, and alignment with the veteran's documented history. Weak DBQs often have overly structured language, think AI generated, minimal narrative, broad severity statements without any type of support, and little explanation tying the findings to medical evidence. So let's talk about how raters actually weigh private DBQs versus C&P exam DBQs. First, foremost, service connection must be established. No DBQ overrides missing service connection. Second, consistency across evidence. Third, severity alignment with rating criteria. And if evidence conflicts, the VA weighs credibility and rationale, not simply who filled out the form. That's important. There is no automatic rule that VA examiners always win. There is also no automatic rule that private doctors always win. The quality of reasoning matters immensely. So what should you do strategically? Well, if it were me, I would not pre-fill or generate any data for a private DBQ. I would solely rely on the private doctor's research and verbiage. You don't want to get caught manufacturing data for a DBQ. You don't want to be in a position where it appears that data was manufactured or influenced. That can create serious credibility and even fraud concerns. I know that sounds extreme, but those risks are real, man. Start paying attention here. Before submitting a private DBQ, cross-check it against the actual rating criteria in the CFR. Make sure the severity markers align with the percentage you believe is appropriate. Confirm that your treatment records support what's written. Make sure the narrative explanation is present. And then prepare for the possibility of a C&P exam anyway. Never assume that the DBQ ends the process. Use a private DBQ to strengthen your claim, but not to bypass the system. If you approach it that way, you're probably going to get a much better outcome overall. Let me close with this here real quick. DBQs document severity. C&P exams evaluate and clarify. Private DBQs are powerful tools, but scrutiny is increasing. Consistency and credibility matter more than volume. Okay, so if this video helped you see how the VA actually evaluates evidence, not just what people say online, well, I think my channel is for you. Each week I'm going to break down some type of a VA system, you know, a little bit kind of casually and strategically from a veteran's viewpoint, so you can make informed decisions before you file. If that kind of clarity helps you, please subscribe. And if you want me to walk through a specific DBQ on screen, migraines, PTSD, back pain, sleep apnea, drop it in the comments. I read them. I may not get to all of them that you asked for, but I do read them. Before I go, I'm adjusting my schedule to allow for a monthly 90-minute live Q&A starting later this spring. If that interests you, please comment below, I'm in, so that I can gauge the level of interest that we have. Remember, you don't win your claims by filing more paperwork. You win by filing accurate paperwork. Take care of one another. I'll see you guys in the next one.